Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Salzer, and I'm the Managing Director of the Stanford Center for Carbon Storage, and this is our Winter Quarter Speaker Series. And today I'm very happy to introduce Arthur Lee. Arthur is a fellow and principal advisor for environment and climate change at Chevron Services Company based in San Ramon, California. He's had a number of positions of increasing responsibilities at Chevron, including the corporation-wide formulation of strategic positioning and policy development on issues ranging from Chevron's internal energy policy, U.S. air pollution issues, to actions addressing climate change concerns. Arthur served as a review editor of the IPCC special report on carbon dioxide capture and storage. And the IPCC received the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize, which in turn recognized all of its authors and review editors for their contributions. Arthur has been attending the annual COP meeting for close to 20 years, and today's talk will focus on key takeaways from COP27 held in Sharm El-Sheik, Egypt last November. Over to you, Arthur.
Okay, thank you. I hope my audio is coming through loud and clear. And let me start sharing my screen. This always takes me a minute with Zoom. Okay.
Arthur, I'm not seeing your slides.
Okay, I thought I had my slide. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay, now we see them. Just put them in presentation mode.
Yeah, it's slow. There we go. Okay, you can see them now, right? I hope.
I'm not quite seeing them. I'm seeing black, and it looks like it's but now maybe it's coming through. But we're actually seeing
family
not
picture.
exactly presentation mode. We're seeing your notes and things as well.
Oh my goodness. That's weird. Okay. Okay, now I don't know why Zoom's like that with me. Well, okay, is this still has notes and things on there? Or?
Sure does, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do about it. I'll just make it as big as I can.
Why don't you make it just as large as you can?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Okay. I don't know why Zoom does that to me. Okay, sorry. Okay, well, let me can you get this away? Okay, let me just say a couple of things first. You might have heard of COP27 as the results were given the title of Sharm El-Sheik Implementation Plan. Okay, I've been observing these COPs for since COP5 in Bonn, COP5 in Bonn, 1999. And in those days, the COPs were, I think there were less than 10,000 people who came to Bonn, and everyone, all the negotiators plus observers, some observers like me, could fit into the Hotel Maritime. Now, granted, the Hotel Maritime was actually unusually large for a major hotel, but it was large. But still, it was large enough to house less than 10,000 people, negotiators and observers, and there were about three German ministry buildings that were also borrowed as part of the COP negotiation process. The big conference room, small conference room, they were all utilized. So it was a relatively manageable COP. Now, fast forward to COP27, that was a couple of months ago in Sharm El-Sheik, Egypt. The COPs now I basically stopped counting at 35,000 people, and the number of participants so large now, it's basically a small city, and requires the services and the accommodation of almost the whole city to accommodate all the people that come. And it's a 2-week process. First week is the technical process where all the technical negotiators would meet in that first week. And they would set out all of the details of the text, if they can agree to text. That would then be the text of all these issues would then get agreed to by the political level, the ministerial level folks, usually Minister of Energy, Minister of Petroleum Resources, Minister of Environmental Resources, Ministry of Environmental Protection, Sustainability, that kind of ministerial level folks. They would come and actually then, in a sense, close the deal that the technical negotiators are able to set out. Now, every COP, there are, the smallest COP I've seen were maybe 50 issues, 50 decisions that need to be made. And at some of the largest COPs, over 70, 75 issues, especially back in the Paris Agreement. Now, Paris Agreement was COP21, so note that number down, okay, COP21, now we're at COP27. Basically now I've been living my life in terms of COP numbers for quite a long time. COP5 again was my first one in Bonn. COP21 was Paris, and that one I think it was also something like 45,000, also about the same size and as this one. And this one was also had the distinction of being probably the second or third longest COP ever. In that every COP is supposed to end on Friday afternoon. Okay? But that's an ideal goal that, in my experience, has never been met. Every COP always go overtime, and they've gone overtime on this one. Like I said, maybe second or third longest. This one gone over to the third Sunday to 3 a.m. When let me go to the next slide. Third Sunday, 3 a.m. when the president of the COP, His Excellency Mr. Shukri here, the foreign minister of Egypt, when he started gaveling, he started holding the gavel in his hands to just make decisions, to actually say, you know, do people agree? You know, they would go through that process, start making decisions at 3 a.m. on the third Sunday. Okay, yeah, and that's another thing. The COPs have now evolved to a point where the first Sunday usually was not a COP day. Now, in the last few COPs, they've started on the first Sunday before in the first week. So there's a second Sunday, and then now it's a third Sunday. So they go through it was at 3 a.m. that morning, and then they did not finish in the plenary session, gaveling all the decisions until around 6 a.m. So it was like I said, one of the longest COPs ever. Okay. So what is the president? What is the presidency? So that you understand, a president or presidency is a country that is willing to host a negotiation, and in this case, Egypt was the host. So physically, they have to host the meeting in their country, which they decided was Sharm El-Sheik. Basically, it is a resort town, a resort city on the beach. It's very much like I'll give you a bit of an analogy, like Cancun for Americans. It's sort of like the Cancun for Europeans, British folks, like that. So it's kind of like that. So it is, in fact, it has a lot of similarities to COP16 Cancun. Okay, so I'll give you that as well, since I was there also. So the presidency is host, it's the physical host. The UN Framework Convention has a secretariat, and they're the ones responsible. The United Nations responsible for the negotiation zone, and the Egyptian president would provide all the diplomats, okay, in that second week to mediate issues. They would act as mediators. So in a sense, Egypt gives up a little bit of its not right, but gives up a little bit of its influence in terms of an advocate for its own issues. Probably, so suborn some of its issues and decision-making to the African group, for example. Okay, there's a lot of subtleties here. African group is like a bloc negotiator. Okay, so the presidency provides all these diplomats. They would fan out across the board, probably in the months leading up to COP27, and also in that second week. The main effort is to mediate all the decisions. So they would be in the room to actually help mediate, or separately mediate between two or multiple parties. Okay, so that's their role. And it's like that for every presidency. So, for example, COP26, it was the diplomatic corps of the United Kingdom that did all of that back in Glasgow. And so it was with the famous one, the Paris COP21. The Paris Agreement was essentially facilitated very well by the French diplomatic corps. They did a fantastic job to get everyone together to actually get that agreement. Now, I started by saying this is an implementation plan. So you hear these names and you say, well, what is this Sharm El-Sheik implementation plan? Does it have the same level of seriousness or level of legal force or something like that as the Paris Agreement? You might ask that question actually, and that would be a good question to ask, because in a sense, these decisions that are made after Paris are actually implementation detail. They're not like the Paris Agreement. Okay, so even if it has a nice name like the implementation plan, or last year when the British diplomatic corps were the front and center to mediate everything, they gave it a very nice name, a fancy name called the Glasgow Climate Pact. Okay, so you would think, wow, that's a really important agreement. In a sense, it was a lot of implementation details, but it is not the same level as a legal treaty as the Paris Agreement, or now I'll go back, or as the Kyoto Protocol was in 1997. Okay, now all of this came. I know I'm still stuck on this slide, but bear with me. But the United Nations Framework Convention started in was agreed to in 1992, and then it came into force in 1994 after like 55 nations and 55% of the global emissions were accounted for by the 55 signatories. Okay, so once 55 countries signed up, basically, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was agreed to and became international law in 1994. And the first COP1, and I was not at COP1. COP1 was in Berlin. COP1 Berlin started the whole process. So another question I asked myself when I went to Bonn in 1999 was, first of all, what the heck is this UNFCCC? Okay, and by that time I already have something called the Kyoto Protocol as well. So the Kyoto Protocol was agreed to in COP3, and COP3 was a major milestone because the Kyoto Protocol, very much like the Paris Agreement, was a legal treaty. And what that means is that every country that have signed on to it, okay, they just sign on to it as a in terms of negotiation agreement and all that. To sign on to it, they actually have to either ratify it or accede to it. Okay, now both have the same effect. Ratification would they would actually provide some letter to the UN, the UN actually General Assembly, to the UN in New York. Okay, that's the headquarters, right? To UN and deposit a letter saying that they will now commit to passing legislation, regulation, whatever the governance of that country looks like, to implement the treaty, whatever that treaty is. Okay, so that's what accession or what ratification actually means. Okay, so the UN Framework Convention is something that the U.S. Senate actually ratified back in around 1994. Okay, so U.S. actually is a party to that, to the UNFCCC. And so what happened then is every year from that point on, from COP1 on 1995, every country that is a party to Convention meet. They have to meet, and it's dictated by the agreement itself that they meet, and they have to negotiate all these decisions in the UN Framework Convention. Now you would ask, why do they have all these decisions? Well, and why does every country actually work on this? And why do they come every year? It's because the treaty itself requires it. And also this is one of those things where you will probably wonder about a lot, is the United Nations in the Framework Convention on Climate Change actually very democratic. Okay, every country has a vote, every country has a voice, and this is this is actually quite different from when it comes to war and peace. Okay? War and peace, of course, is all governed by the Security Council. Now, in the Security Council, you have the 5 nuclear weapon states that are the permanent members, and you have 1 rotating member from the General Assembly. Okay, so that's how the UN, when it makes decisions and also resolutions and all that, it has an executive council, if you will. The Security Council is that. So there's always the Security Council in one part of the UN that really governs war and peace. Now, on the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's very different. Every country has a voice, and every country wants its voice. So there's no XCOM, there's nothing like that. Nobody makes decisions for the rest of the world. It's every country has a vote. Okay, so I let that sink in, and that's why every year there's this thing called a COP, Conference of Parties, and the parties are actually parties to the UN Framework Convention. Now, as I said, COP3 is Kyoto Protocol, and then now there's and of course COP21, as I said, was the Paris Agreement. So you can see from COP3, Kyoto Protocol, to COP21, it was an annual thing. So you basically have to wait 18 years if you want to see results. You actually waited 18 years to see countries, okay, incrementally making changes and incrementally decide that they will come to this thing called a Paris Agreement. Kyoto Protocol was a different regime where a certain set of countries, a subset of countries like the OECD countries, the advanced industrialized countries, basically had to commit to a target and a timetable, which everyone missed, by the way. And so when it came time to really thinking about this, somewhere in between COP3 and COP21, in the middle there, around COP15 in Copenhagen, countries became much more serious again and thinking about what further action they really need to take. And they really started at COP15. That was the first year of President Obama's office, his first term, and that was one of the most dramatic COPs in the history of diplomacy. And in fact, it was the most dramatic COP where close to over 183 heads of nations and heads of government and heads of state were actually attended that Copenhagen COP15. Okay? And Obama was there too. That was his first term in office, first year in office, in fact. So, so all of that came to a dramatic conclusion at COP15, where it was a spectacular failure as well, in that what could have been a Paris Agreement in Copenhagen did not materialize. It was completely fell flat, and countries were just not ready to come to some sort of new legal agreement. It took them, of course, from COP15 to COP21, another 6 years, to negotiate further and further and further, and then until COP21 they got somewhere. Okay, so I want to give you all this background so that you understand this whole COP process. It is inevitable, okay, because that's what countries wanted, and it's actually an inevitable conclusion in terms of the governance. Every country wants to say, there's no XCOM, no executive council, no star chamber, nothing like that to make decisions for everyone else. Okay, everyone has a voice. Okay, so it's important to understand that. And so I said some of this already. And by the way, I took all these photos, except for the first one that I just showed you. But these photos all, I was there, so I'm able to take lots of photos. And so I talked about this already. And this is what a negotiation actually looks like. Okay, so I just have some of these photos in the subsequent slide as well to show you. In fact, this particular negotiation, the room is actually, this is not one of the larger rooms. This is one of the actually smaller rooms. But as you can see, there are more than 20 countries in here, and probably close to 30. And some countries negotiate as blocks. Okay, so that one of the biggest blocks is called COP77. Sorry, not COP77. It's called Group 77 plus China. Okay, Group 77 plus China, meaning they're all developing countries plus China, and it's the biggest bloc in terms of negotiations, and they're given the privilege of speaking first. Okay, in any intervention, in any issue, when they start the round of the negotiation, G77 plus China gets the first say. Okay. So let me just give you 5 key messages here, just 5 key findings, and then I'll actually stop there. So number 1, the Paris Agreement goals are clearly restated with an emphasis shifting more towards the 1.5 degrees. Okay. Now, you know the Paris Agreement well, then you will recall that the Paris Agreement is all about achieving a temperature rise well below 2 degrees, okay, well below 2 degrees Celsius, and with efforts towards no more than 1.5 degrees. So what we're looking at is always a goal, this temperature rise of somewhere between 2 and 1.5, and certainly a lot closer to 1.5. So that's been the goal for several years now, since 2015, COP21. Okay, so that's been the goal. Now, what was agreed to at the COP26 in Glasgow was there was a further elaboration of what that means, some of the actions. Some of those actions include a key action on phasing out phasing out of coal use, okay? Phasing out of coal use, and phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. So I'll make that very clear. Now what was going to be the decision right up to the last hour, until 2 nations objected, and during plenary they objected, and the president of COP at that time, the UK diplomat, Mr. Alok Sharma, he was the president of COP26. I could see his face kind of went white, and he was very almost upset. He's a diplomat, professional diplomat, but you could tell that he was not happy at that moment when I think it was China who spoke up first. The objection was that they do not like the words phase out of coal. They wanted to change it to phase down coal, and of course you know what that means. Phase down meaning you don't have to phase it out. You just have to decrease the use of coal. Okay. So both China and India, and supported by several other countries, including countries in West Africa, I recall. This was during plenary. Okay, this was during plenary live that I could watch. Actually, I was already back home by then via UN camera, because this again was in overtime. So the UN camera actually followed him, Alok Sharma, and John Kerry, the special envoy, okay, the special envoy for climate change, the SPEC. Okay, that's what people call him now, the SPEC, SPECC, the special envoy for climate change. So John Kerry has the same diplomatic rank as a Secretary of State on the climate issue, so that he can represent himself to other countries, that he has the authority to speak for the executive branch, to speak for the president. Okay? So he is like in this case, he's like the Secretary of State, but only on these issues. So John Kerry actually went around. This was the COP26 now, not this time. At COP26, he went around and really started bilateral discussion, just on camera even. We couldn't catch the sound, but the UN cameraman actually followed him. And you could see that he went to China, he went to India, and really talked to them. Really talked to them for quite a long time until they got the compromise that it was phased down, and that the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies remained. Okay, so that remained is despite India's urging. So the compromise was halfway through, and this at this COP27. Switzerland, also in the final hour at COP27 now. And the representative from Switzerland spoke up. He was representing a negotiating bloc called the Environmental Integrity Group. And Switzerland, on behalf of VIG, basically complained. He didn't name any parties, but he again said there were unnamed parties that really tried to roll back the Paris Agreement goals that were restated, COP26. So he didn't have to name them, but many of us as observers can guess who he was talking about. So this was in response to the fact that a lot of countries also want to have 100% renewable energy, like in the next few years. Okay? So there are many countries on the other side of the issue who would say that's not possible. We cannot do that. We need the funding. We need the climate finance to actually help any of that to happen. And so there are many countries who are on the other side pushing back on these developments for 100% renewable. So that's what the first finding is about. It's about this again, this compromise that had to be reached, and what that means was that it actually retained the COP26 agreement on the Paris goals. The Paris goals cannot be changed, of course. It's a legal agreement. But what it is the emphasis on whether it should be more towards 1.5 degrees, or should it still restate the well below 2 degrees. So what happened is that some of these statements now favor, okay, there is a shading of the words, shading more towards to go of 1.5 degrees. Okay? So I just want to bring that to your attention. Now, because that relates to finding number 2. The mitigation work program to enhance nationally determined contribution by some parties still needs to be completely fleshed out in 2023 and 2024. So let me explain what this means. Even that simple sentence has a lot of meaning. Okay? First of all, when you anytime in the future you hear or you read the words mitigation, when you read the word work program, it should immediately alert you to the fact that countries actually disagree during the negotiations. So they could not come to an agreement. And so what they agreed to was kick the decision down the road, kick the can down the road, and they have agreed to work on it. And so that's what a work program actually means. Work program means countries will now, for the next couple of years, they will agree to set out agendas, some workshops, some meetings, official meetings, where they will try to come to an agreement again on whatever issue that they disagreed on. In this case, this is the issue about enhancing the nationally determined contribution. Okay. Now, for those of you who follow this more closely, you would understand that the Paris Agreement, at the heart of the Paris Agreement, it's a voluntary agreement. Okay? It's a voluntary agreement wrapped around with some mandatory provisions of reporting and transparency. Okay? So that's how you really should look at the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is at its core is a voluntary agreement. Every country can volunteer to do something. Okay, at the end of the day, they can volunteer to do a lot, or they can volunteer to do very little, according to their circumstances. Their nationally determined contribution. That's why it's called NDCs. Okay, so in the last year or so, a couple of years, there are still many countries who have not revised their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions. They basically stuck with what they agreed to back in 2015 or 16, after they ratified or acceded to the Kyoto Protocol. I mean, to the Paris Agreement. Sorry, I still have Kyoto Protocol in my mind, because Kyoto Protocol is actually not gone away yet. It's still there. So every time you meet at a COP meeting, you're actually negotiating 3 treaties. That's my digression here. You actually still implementing the UNFCCC. You're still implementing the Kyoto Protocol, whatever left of it, and then and now you're fresh implementing the Paris Agreement. Okay? So that's why at these COPs there are like 50 to 70 issues every time. So anyway, I digress. So the point is, finding number 2 is that there is a work program. At least countries have not walked away from the issue. They basically said we will continue to work on this, and we'll see if we can come up with a decision to urge everyone else to come to the table with a new nationally determined contribution and how to do that. So that's number 2. Number 3, the finding of number 3 about loss and damage, that really caught a lot of headlines. Okay, if you recall back in November when you heard about the COP, countries getting together, the biggest headlines that came out of the agreement, all the major newspapers, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Washington Post, they all caught the same thing. In loss and damage, there's a new financial facility has been set. Okay. What these newspapers actually, even for the best ones, what they don't say and what they haven't said, because perhaps they just don't have time to write all this or research it, is the fact that the loss and damage mechanism actually has been there for quite a long time, since COP19. Okay, and I'll tell you a story with that one too. Okay, COP19. Before COP19, there was no loss and damage. There was nothing. Okay, so at COP19 Warsaw, and this was at Warsaw COP, a week before the Warsaw COP, before COP19, Super Typhoon Haiyan struck the east coast of the Philippines, caused widespread damage, especially to the city, Cebu City. Okay, and that damage was, was like any super typhoon that strikes Philippines often do that, and in this case it was terrible damage. The lead negotiator, Mr. Nadarev Sano, okay, he's a technical negotiator. Remember I told you that there's first week there's technical negotiations and all that. So the lead of the delegation, the lead negotiator, technical negotiator, Mr. Sano, he in plenary, in the very first day of plenary, he basically raised his placard and made a statement, and it was a fairly dramatic statement. He said that his family, some members of his family were not only injured but were killed. He said it was a traumatic experience for him, and he really should be back in the Philippines. So what happened was he went on a hunger strike, and he went on a hunger strike, I think, for about 5-6 days, basically that first week. And there were lots of people, observers as well, who were sympathetic to his call for a hunger strike. So many joined him in solidarity. So there was a lot of emotional pressures, political pressures during that week or even 2 weeks. And finally, the loss and damage mechanism was agreed to, of course, at the end of the second week. And that became known as the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, the WIM, W-I-M. Okay? So that started in COP19. And so there is a loss and damage mechanism already, but there is no money to it, nothing. Okay, it is just a mechanism, again, like a UN body. UN sets out an executive committee for the WIM, the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. So they set out an executive committee. They would hold workshop in session during the COPs and also outside of the session to talk about what loss and damage actually means. You can talk all about it, but if you don't define it, there's no implementation. So they talk about whether it's some early warning, monitoring, some science around it. They also talk about talk about any kind of assistance that people might get, some technical assistance, all of that too. But at the end of the day, they danced around the issue of money for several years, and finally at this COP came to a head, and the U.S. and EU, which for many years, at least since or before COP19 in Warsaw, were very resistant to any loss and damage, okay, any loss and damage mechanism, especially objecting to the issue of liability. No country wants to be liable for any damages, and so that they cannot be sued in the International Court of Justice. So nobody wants that. Now at this COP, finally, I think EU and the US finally also relented, but they still are not talking about any liability. They're willing to set up this financial facility, basically money. Okay. Now, very quickly, there's a pot of money from the UN Framework Convention many years ago called the Global Environment Facility, and later during the Paris Agreement, when that got agreed to, something called a Green Climate Fund. So that's a bucket of money for mitigation, for reducing emissions. Okay. The second bucket of money has to do with adaptation, and that was set out in the Kyoto Protocol called the Adaptation Fund. And that Adaptation Fund also has some money in it now, because of projects that were done by countries on trading. It's called the CDM, Clean Development Mechanism. So that has some money in it. And now there has never been this third bucket of money until now. Now you would ask, what is this third bucket of money? Well, think of it this way: this new transnational transitional committee, excuse me, this thing called in the finding number 3, the transitional committee has been agreed to be set up to start talking about these issues, talking about money. Where is this money going to come from? Okay, and that's a major bucket of issues right there. And secondly, if there is any loss or any damage by any single country, what happens? Is it like an insurance policy? Does the country apply to some insurance agency to get money back from a policy, or not even a policy, but from a fund? And this fund is a facility, so it's not necessarily that it will be grants. It could actually be some kind of loan as well. And of course, many countries don't like loans, especially many developing countries. They just don't like the ideas of loans at all because they owe a lot of money already. So the financial facility is set up, but then you actually have to think about how is it going to work. Okay? It's a big idea, but you have to actually think of how it works. You get the money first, and then when there's money, how is it going to be continued to be funded, and also how do you dispense the money? What kind of criteria to use? So I'll give you another quick story. At COP27, when you walk around, there are many side events. And there are many pavilions. One of the pavilions is a national pavilion set up by Pakistan. Okay, and Pakistan, of course, in 2022, if you recall your newswire stories, you recall that Pakistan was basically underwater. I think more than half the country was underwater for maybe 3 months, 2-3 months. It really was inundated. Lots of people displaced. Lots of tragedies. Okay, So Pakistan, the pavilion at the COP27, they will not let the rest of the world forget it. So they featured all the news stories, all the videos, all the things in their pavilion. And the biggest headline over the pavilion was, "What happens in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan." Of course, that is a play on the Las Vegas advertising. That you might remember from a few years ago. Okay, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Vegas, right? So Pakistan turned it around and said, what happens in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. Of course, that's an implication for climate refugees, right? So that's what they were not hinting at, but they were literally saying that the floods, disaster like that will cause a lot of migration. Okay, so that was number 3. Now, whenever countries talk about money, they always have problems, and the fourth finding is also about money. in the Paris Agreement, this new collective quantified goal was based on the old collective quantified goal that was set out in the Paris Agreement in 2015. It was an agreement that that countries would contribute about $100 billion per year to these other countries that need them. Okay, any countries, especially in their NDCs, the nationally determined contribution, if they set out a unconditional NDC, they could also set out conditional NDCs, and these conditional NDCs often came with a price tag or some kind of request or demand for assistance, technology assistance, as well as financial assistance. So, so these NDCs come with a price tag. Okay, and the collective goal back in 2015 that was agreed to was $100 billion per year. But that goal has never been achieved. Okay, the closest that goal was achieved was about $90 billion was collected and dispensed, but for 1 year. Okay, only 1 year. Okay, and that period would have been 2020 to 2025. So far, the accumulated total is nowhere near 100 billion per year. Okay, it's only right now 90 billion a year in 1 year. And so, so the Paris Agreement itself set out a new schedule for an agreement for negotiation again on this goal beyond 2025. And the stipulation in the agreement itself was that this will be a floor. 100 billion would only be a floor, and that the new goal has to be, of course, bigger, higher than 100 billion per year. Now, no one has to tell you, I think, that the negotiation for this will be fraught, okay? Simply because how can anyone trust anyone else when they made a commitment but it was never followed through? And so to now negotiate a new goal, it's good luck. Okay, so I know I said it very cavalierly, but that's the way I've observed it. This really is good luck. I mean, because it's just no trust. Okay, there's no trust on money. When it comes to money issue, there's almost no trust at all between countries. Okay. Okay. So number 5, the fifth finding is a little bit lower on the list for me, not for me, but for countries now, because they finally agreed to what's called Article 6, all the details that are needed to start trading emissions and how countries can cooperate with each other can actually start after COP26. And now even after COP27, there are even more details on Article 6, paragraph 2. Okay, Article 6, paragraph 2 is what's called almost like an emission trading club. Any two or more countries can actually arrange themselves into a group, and they can cover their emissions, they can cap it, and then they can trade emissions underneath that. Any excess, any additional emission reduction, they can trade with each other. So that can be done now under 6.2. What cannot be done so far is 6.4, paragraph 4. Okay, Article 6, paragraph 4 is more of a United Nations centric, a UN-centric mechanism that still has to be completely fleshed out. There are a lot more details this time. There are even lots of accounting framework and taxation on it, what's called share proceeds. So all that actually has been agreed as well in 6.4. But there's still some key issues about that, defining what is a carbon removal project, and also very esoteric but necessary approval for authorizing a project under 6.4. So all that has to be done. Now, the irony for me has always been, and I'll stop in a moment, the irony for me has always been Article 6, when we were observing this, it was called the cooperative mechanism of cooperative approaches between countries. So that's what it was. But Article 6 took the longest time to get agreement between countries. So apparently countries, in some ways, did not really want to cooperate with each other. It was very tough for many years until COP26. And of course, we had a gap year too, literally a gap year because of the pandemic. So we also did not make any progress at all during the pandemic year of 2020. Okay, so let me I'll close out very soon now. I promise. Okay, the rest of this deck, I think Sarah is willing to share this. So the Sharm El-Sheik implementation plan actually has, I think, around 17 chapters. I actually only covered in this deck these highlighted chapters because those were the ones that were most interesting to me anyway. And I didn't report on the rest. And there are lots of details in the back. Okay, so I will show you. There are lots of details like this. Details like this you see, very detailed about how the text actually looks. Okay, and there are many about ambition and implementation and other issues. But let me just stop on this one. There's this slide I really want to show you. Okay, and especially to this audience. Okay, at COP24, sorry, at COP24, starting COP24, 25, the youth movement, okay, have become very influential and fairly powerful. Okay, certainly very makes a lot of noise, literally lots of noise within the negotiation venue. Okay. At COP25, that was held in Madrid, about 300 protesters, mainly from the youth movement, as well as some from the environmental NGO, NGOs, the Youngos and the Engos, and these are real names, YOU NGO, Youngos and Engo, ENGO. These constituencies basically took over one of the negotiating session rooms, and they did not let the negotiators in or proceed. And that was a big no-no. So the UN police, and these are real police, I mean, they have weapons. So UN police came in and basically declared it illegal. It was an illegal assembly. They did not register with the UN police. If they had, they would have been allowed to do some things, but they didn't. And so they disrupted the negotiating session. It was towards the end, by the way. So you heard me say about how these things can go over time. Well, this was a big no-no. So they disrupted the negotiation, and all 300 of them were arrested and thrown out of the venue, and they were debadged. Now, I don't know whether afterwards they would be given the badge to come to future COPs, but certainly for the rest of the COPs, they were debadged. They were not allowed back in. And so the youth movement have become stronger, but also noisier and certainly much louder and very taking direct action at these negotiations. But sometimes it was very disruptive. And so at this COP, several countries, including I think even the UN itself, came up with some money and basically rented a space that was within the negotiation venue. Okay, it's all within the blue zone, the UN zone, where negotiators are, and they have their own youth pavilion. It's called the Children and Youth Pavilion. So for 2 weeks there, that I could observe that they were very active, and they had lots of speakers, lots of meetings. So they were given a much louder voice to be at the COP, and were able to hold events where they can learn things and where they can also speak their minds. And so the messages have become angrier, much louder, much angrier over time, over the last 6 years that I can recall, and they are louder. But so this was a venue that allowed them to learn and also take a much more active role, okay, without being too disruptive. Okay, so I will stop there, Sarah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Arthur. This has been fascinating, very interesting. I've learned a ton about what goes on at COP. I would like to ask folks, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. So just type in your question, and then I'm looking at those questions, and I will pose a few of them to Arthur right now.
Okay.
Let's just start with sort of the elephant in the room a little bit.
Sure.
And the question really is, the skeptics among some colleagues might say that having an oil company have a role at COP is the proverbial fox in the henhouse. What does a large oil company bring to the table? So maybe first of all, you could explain what your role is at COP, and then why an oil company attends COP and what's their role.
I'll be happy to. First of all, I go with the flag of IPCA, okay, and you would find this interesting. That this is something that I did not know. I joined at Chevron. Chevron was an IPCA member since the very beginning. IPCA has the long name in the past called the International Petroleum Industry Environmental Conservation Association. It was in 1974 that IPCA was founded, and it was not because not necessarily because the oil and gas industry decided that it should have one. It was actually a United Nations environment program, which was established that same year. And from our history books that I could see that it was the UN that actually invited the global oil and gas industry to form an association of some kind that would not be lobbying. Okay, so I want to make that point very clear. It would be more of a fact-finding kind of association industry group for the industry. That would be the official communication channel with the UN EP, United Nations Environment Program, established also in 1974, and IPCA was established in parallel to that. Okay, so I go as an observer of that organization sometimes, and I've gone as an observer under other organizations as well, including the International Emission Trading Association, which is a very, very strong and clear business voice on carbon markets and approaches, cooperative approaches between countries. And we certainly advocate for that. Now, that's IETA. So I don't want to confuse people, but I go in the last few COP, I've been going also as IPCA, and we don't lobby. As an observer, this is what I do. Okay, I'll show you this picture right here. I go and actually observe negotiators talking about what on these subjects and follow the negotiation itself. Now, I do not lobby, like I said, but at these meetings, the negotiators themselves. This particular issue was, I think, on carbon markets, I believe. This was on science and technological advice, substance. Okay, so I follow these negotiations very simply because, as an oil and gas company, and also now growing non-fossil business in Chevron, we are also very much technology developers, technology deployment catalysts as well. So we also have been deploying non-fossil energy now in hydrogen, and certainly in carbon capture and storage, and also in carbon offsets. Okay, as well as geothermal energy. So a lot of things we do now also encompass technology development that are non-fossil. Now, as an observer, this is actually what I do. So thank you for asking this question. I actually go to these meetings as well as anyone else. Okay, any official observer, from the Youngos, Engos, trade union, Tungos, the TU NGO, and gender NGO, anyone can come and look at these, observe these negotiations as long as the parties themselves allow. And for the technology negotiation, and that's what this one is, technology negotiation, they actually really, really want us there. And why? Because, well, who has the technologies? It's us, it's industry, right? A lot of industry has the technologies and they want to talk to us. So while these negotiators are, they're doing formal country-to-country negotiations, okay, they don't allow us to speak, by the way. Okay, we don't get to speak. But on the side, if they want, they can and do speak to us and ask questions of us, about certain issues that they might be looking at. So this is what an actual negotiation looks like. I just want to show you, you put up a Microsoft Word on a screen like that, and then on a good day, they will go through paragraph by paragraph if they have written something, and then they would approve these paragraphs. If they don't like the sentences, they'll bracket them. They'll actually bracket sentences, and then they'll go back to it and see whether you would agree with removing the brackets, or if it's a really bad day, they might go through sentence by sentence, and then some people would say, well, we don't agree to any of this. And so the countries would say, well, that whole paragraph has to go. So you could end up with a decision that's kind of choppy, but that's what they come up with. And that in fact, what negotiation actually is that they do this literally for hours for those 2 weeks. And they go through very late night as well, okay? So this is not the, here, let me show you I know these are still pictures, but this one is a bit dramatic, so I'll say it to you. I'll tell you this one. This was at the very end, the last hour, the very last minute of a negotiation on technology. It's technology development and transfer. Okay, the U.S. negotiator, this man here, and the EU negotiator. Okay, they're intently looking at a screen about an intervention that came from Argentina. That's off screen. And the Argentina representative, he said something that he inserted some words as a counter proposal to the US, for example. And so the US and the EU negotiated on this issue, this particular decision, they were in alliance. And so they were really focusing on what those words mean that were counter proposed by Argentina. And finally, the chair, who was actually that woman that I showed earlier, this lady here, she's actually an Austrian government representative, but in this round of negotiations, she agreed to be chair, and so she's no longer an Austrian. She would represent the UN as a chair to make sure the negotiations are successful. So she threatened everyone to say, okay, if you cannot agree, then I'll impose Rule 16, draft Rule 16. And you would think, what the heck is draft Rule 16? I didn't know these things until somewhere after COP5 also. Draft Rule 16 is a rule that says, okay, if countries don't agree and come up with a decision, then I will delete everything that was done for the last year, everything. I would delete everything. And then you have to start over again next year, or this year now, in June. And you have to renegotiate this issue again with as if you've forgotten everything. You have a white piece of paper ahead of you, in front of you in June again to renegotiate this issue. So that's called a draft Rule 16. Okay. Now, now you will also wonder, what the heck, why is it called a draft rule? Is it like not final? Well, it is indeed not final. Remember I told you about COP1 in Berlin? Well, it turns out in COP1, if you gather anybody around, right, to start a whole process, what would you do? Some of the first thing you do is, okay, what are the objectives, and what the process you use to make decisions, right? So that is a natural thing to do in COP1. That's what they try to do, the decision-making process. Well, guess what? In COP1 back in 1995, they had a whole set of proposed procedures, draft procedures. And then one country, I think, proposed that, okay, let's have a voting mechanism. Let's everyone have a one country, one vote. Well, guess what? Countries like EU and US, what do you think their position would be on something like that on voting? I guess I'm posing a rhetorical question.
So the group can't answer. They're not live.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so I'll say that. I'll say this. EU and the US, of course, voted against, no, not voted. They strenuously objected to any voting mechanism at all in this process. So there's never been any voting in this COP process. And what happened is the rules of procedures have never been adopted formally either. Okay, they've always been draft, so that any country can step up and say, well, those are only draft rules, so I can ignore them. Okay, so if they don't like something, they can always turn over everything. Okay, but so far, countries have been civil enough to at least go by most of these draft rules. Okay, including draft rule number 16, which deletes everything,
Wow.
everything that's ever been negotiated in the history of the COP. Okay.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you so much, Arthur.
That's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, I actually see that it is 1 o'clock and we are at our
Yeah.
time. I would like, Arthur, is it okay if we put the slides, the full set of slides on our website along with a recording of this event?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for participating. And I'm sorry we didn't get to more Q&A, but it was fascinating listening to you, Arthur,
Right.
and your experiences at what appears was a very dramatic meeting. So thanks again. And thank
Sure.
you everyone for attending today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.